Now, as you know, most of you probably know, Lakefield has been called the cradle of Canadian literature, primarily because of its pioneer authors, Susanna Moodie and Catharine Parr Traill, who lived and wrote here in the 1830s. The Backwards of Canada by Catharine and Roughing It in the Bush by Susanna are detailed accounts of their lives here as settlers' wives, as mothers, and of course, as writers. Anyway, they were close as sisters, having been born just 2 years apart, but totally different in personality and temperament, which is of course reflected in their Canadian writings. And they, of course, dealt very, very differently with the challenges that they faced in their lives. And their writings, collective writings, have become a rich resource for researchers and historians and other writers ever since. And so during the walk, I'll share some details about their challenging lives here, and of course their accomplishments as writers. During the walk, we'll also hear about Canada's first female poet laureate, the uniquely gifted Irish woman, Isabella Valancy Crawford, who started writing by living here in Lakefield in the 1860s. So I'm sure all of you know that Lakefield was the home to Margaret Laurence. She lived here from 1974 to her death in 87. And during the previous 3 summers, she had spent time down at the small cottage, the shack she called it, by the banks of the Otonabee River, just south of here. And she was working at that time on the Diviners, which was the 4th, and as it turned out, the last of a series of novels set in the semi-fictional town of Madawaska. When the walk is over, we're going to start just right down on the river here. Talk a little bit about Samuel Strickland. We kind of sort of kicked the ball down the road, so to speak. And we'll then move along down by the river, across the river, and over and the other side of the river at Catharine's house that she lived in later on when she came back to live and work here. Come back up by Regent Street and end up at Margaret's house.
Oh. Yeah. But most of these are Stricklands. Yes, and so there's.
They're going to get cleaned.
Oh, well, that would be good. That would be good.
That's been cleaned.
Wow. Oh yes, I see that now. Yeah.
Because you can't read them anymore.
Exactly.
Sure, that'd be great. This morning, and then as I was looking over here, I found it over on books on a table sitting there. He was buried in this graveyard right here. So now, as you look north of here, way north, you're, where beyond the marina there, you're looking at the waterfront section of where the land that he settled on. Okay, and it was all wilderness here at the time. So, yeah. And he made a go of it, really did. So, that's Samuel. And and she had actually published many stories and articles about nature prior to her marriage to Thomas Traill in 1831, and then their arrival here roughly about a year later. Now he was a former British military officer, and they were kind of let go after the wars in Europe. And he was on half pay and entitled to free land here in the Canadas, courtesy of the British Crown, which was very nice. When Catharine and her husband disembarked at the port of entry, Coburg was the port of entry then for the backcountry, they came straight in up here into what was then known as the backcountry, with the intention of connecting with her brother, who was, settling here on this property. No sooner had she gone to bed than who should arrive but her brother Samuel, who had heard of their arrival, and being the kind of devil-may-care guy that he was, he canoed on the Otonabee River at night through it's a rock. Nice at that time was a rock on the rapid river, and he made it in one piece, as did the canoe. Had arranged to have some hired men clear part of the property that he acquired, which is north of Samuel's, and just abuts the present location of Lakefield College School. If you're going in the gate of Lakefield College School, on your left-hand side, you'll see a plaque, and it tells you that this was the land that they settled on. And there was money coming in, and she and John started the Victoria magazine in Belleville, and she serialized various articles that she wrote that had to do with her life in Doro Township in the bush. And these eventually became part of her famous book, Roughing It in the Bush. However, during the 70s, she came here for extended visits with Catharine, who was already back here living in this house here. And we can well imagine that they must have spent, this was in the 1870s, so they must have spent many a long afternoon, in the rocking chairs on the porch, reminiscing about their challenging and adventurous lives here and their extended families. They both had really large extended families, and of course their successes and failures as writers, and how much had changed in the land and in the country and within themselves, which is another whole aspect of this story, how much had changed within themselves during those years. And then 2 years later, Thomas Traill died, and with what little money she had left and with help from faithful Samuel, what a good brother he was, she was able to, and some of her daughters who were doing quite well, she was able to purchase this house, which was then a recently built cottage, which at that time had an uninterrupted view of the river. It was Otonabee, it was just a river. And here she lived until her death and continued to write, and gave this country two remarkable books, which are based on her knowledge and observation of the natural world. The first was Canadian Wildflowers, which contained really detailed and very beautiful illustrations done by Susanna's daughter Agnes, who was a gifted artist. And it was sold by subscription, 500, and they just went like hotcakes. That was followed a few years later by what some people refer to as the culmination of her study and love of native Canadian flowers and fauna, studies and plant life of Canada. And it's hard for us to imagine now, but the impact that those books made here in Canada at that time. I mean, it was a combination of literature and science and a natural appreciation of the natural world. And they were very highly rated and really opened doors for Catharine. She was writing actually up to the day before she died. She was writing a letter to an acquaintance in London, and she died in 1899, just before the turn of the century, at the age of 97. And she, at that time, was the oldest living writer, not only in the Canadas, but in the British Empire, Dominion. Quite an accomplishment. So that's, I kind of squeezed that in because we are getting a little behind time. We're going back across, we go back up those steps, we're going to cross the bridge, if you want to go that way, and we're going to go to the lights on Queen Street, cross over, and make our way up to where Isabella Valancy Crawford lived and Margaret Laurence. And her father was a doctor, and the extended family were part of Dublin's professional class. I was just mentioning to those, and I found out that she spent her early years till she was 8 before coming here. They lived in a house just down from where I was born, and the house is still there. a bit of a scandal. He was accused of misappropriating public funds, likely because of his drinking. It was later we realized that he was alcoholic, and they had to move out of Paisley. And while they were staying in a small hotel in transit north of Kingston, Providence played a part in Isabella's development, her future, and her development as a writer. Quite extraordinary. It so happened that Robert Strickland, one of the many sons of Samuel, and his brother were in the region at the time on behalf of the Canada Company, which his father had worked for in the Guelph area many years before. And he happened to meet the Crawfords at the hotel, the small little village hotel north of Kingston, and he sensed that they were in a bit of dire straits and needed some help. And he knew that Lakefield at that time needed a doctor, so he suggested they should move here. A time before the Crawfords made the acquaintance of other members of the extended Strickland clan, which they did, particularly Catharine Parr Traill, who had come back to live in that house we just saw and was writing away, busy as a bee. And we know from Catharine's letters that she visited with the Crawfords, the young Isabella, and Isabella was quite talented and vivacious and so forth. And she might have helped her in her early years at writing. We don't know for sure. There's no written evidence of that, but it's quite possible that that happened. When Robert Strickland returned home from business in the eastern townships, moved back into Redden Hall, the family moved here sometime in 1862. This house looked very different then than it does now. But basically that house. And there they remained, it's hard to know, for between 1 to 3 years. There's no doubt that that Lakefield and its environs played a major influence on her development. She developed and she lived here till she was 19. So she was a young woman when she left here, already quite experienced. And she developed an evocative symbolic language derived from elements of the natural world and her observation and her awareness of native lore and native lifestyle, which she was surrounded by here. And she used this in her more mature work, her poetry and her stories later on. These elements gave them a kind of a mythic dimension. By the way, her work was highly praised in England and even in the States, in New York, Variety magazine. And one reviewer in England said about her major poetry is kind of they are long narrative poems, Spooks Is Past, Malcolm's Katie, that they had the mark of genius. So she was highly thought of in certain circles. Her remains are buried in Peterborough Little Lake Cemetery. There's a high Celtic cross that was raised by supporters later, and it has the inscription, Isabella Valancy Crawford, poet by the gift of God. So, as Margaret herself was, and divining, always looking for, the liberation, personal liberation, freedom, love, and so forth. And this theme, runs throughout the course of her novels. From The Stone Angel to right through to The Diviners. The river, she saw this phenomenon. The river is going south, but the wind blows, it's going the other way. How does that happen? And so it's a wonderful symbol of trying to find unity in out of duality. The most autobiographical of all her novels, most autobiographically sourced of all her novels. And she's helped by, this wonderful Old Man Royland, the diviner. So she's done her own divining. And she finishes, at the end of the novel, she finishes her book. She's writing a novel throughout the course of this story. We may have a chance to carry on a little bit about Margaret if you want to ask questions. We're going back to the museum here, just around the corner. Take any questions, share any comments, and if they don't throw us out, we'll get a chance to share a few brief readings of the books, of these writers. Okay? So we just go this way.